Okay friends, one of the first things we need to do is safely raise and support the Jeep so the wheels are off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and the wheel. Now that the wheel's off of here, we have a nice clear view of our flex hose and our ABS wire. Go ahead and remove the ABS wire from the flex hose. That's going to give us plenty of slack. The next thing we're going to do is push back our caliper piston. Now typically if you wanted to, you can go ahead and open up your bleeder screw. That's going to allow the fluid to get pushed out as you push back your caliper piston. If you're not going to, just carefully get in between here and then slowly pry back. That's going to push the fluid back up and through your flex hoses and into the master cylinder. Now we're going to remove our caliper slider bolts. Remove your caliper, inspect around here, make sure you don't see any fluid seeping out. This looks good, so let's set it aside. When you set it aside, make sure you're putting no pressure on your flex hose. Remove our brake pads. Now let's remove our caliper bracket bolts. Remove the caliper bracket. If this is your first brake job on your particular Jeep, you're probably going to have these little clips. Just go ahead and grab onto those with some cutters and rip them right out of the way. Continue on with our hammer and break this free. Remove your rotor. Let's go ahead and clean up our hub mating surface. So now let's put our caliper bracket on a nice bench where we can do some work to it. We need to continue on by stripping it down, and essentially what I mean by that is to go ahead and remove your sliders. Place your slider down and remove the boot from the slider. I'm going to place that on its corresponding side, so of course when I put it back together, everything's going to go back where it came from. The next thing we want to do is remove our caliper tins right here. These are the tins that are going to go in between the bracket and the pads themselves. So let's go ahead and pop those off of there. Set those aside. At this point, we need to continue on by cleaning this down. Let's take our little brush, get right in between here. All right, that looks good. It's very important to make sure you get any raised areas off of here. Once you're sure that you have it nice and clean, continue on to all 4 corners. Now over a nice collection bucket, let's continue on by cleaning out our slider tubes. The tube's clean. Let's pay attention to the outer aspect right here. That's the area where that seal is going to ride. You want to make sure that as the boot's sitting on there, it's going to make sure that no moisture can make its way in. While the bracket's continuing to dry, let's go ahead and set that aside. Let's move along to cleaning up our sliders. Go ahead and wipe those down so you can get a good look at them. You're going to want to make sure that this is a nice smooth surface because it has to be able to slide in and out of that caliper bracket tube. Obviously up in this area right up here, this is going to be very important to make sure it's clean and clear of debris as well, because any moisture that makes its way inside this area is of course going to cause a brake issue down the road. Let's go ahead and clean up both. Now with both sliders clean, let's continue on to cleaning and inspecting the boots. Go ahead and stick a rag right inside here. We're just going to work that all the way around, try to get off any remaining grease that's inside there. Of course it could be contaminated. We want to make sure we get nice clean grease in there. Once you're sure it looks clean, go ahead and give it a nice stretch and make sure you don't see any rips and tears. You also want to make sure that it's very pliable. This has to be able to move in and out. If it doesn't and it's very stiff, you need to go ahead and replace it. This feels good, let's do them both. So now that we have everything nice and cleaned and inspected, we need to continue on by lubing it. So I'm going to start by lubing these areas right here. I'm just going to use a little bit of this moly grease. This is high temperature grease, especially made for brakes. Go ahead and layer all 4 corners of this, and then we're going to put on some brand new tins. So now looking at your set of tins, you're going to realize that there's 2 different tins in these. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them, but essentially there's just 2 different ones. You're going to see that they have little flippy-doos that face off to one side or the other, and of course there's going to be one long side, and then one side that comes off and over towards like that. Now when you're installing these onto your bracket, you want to make sure that you have the area that has the flippy-doo facing out and away from the rotor. You're also going to want to make sure that you have this flat area facing down. So essentially I'm just going to take this, just like this, put it on here, slide it on. I have the bottom area facing down along this area, and then I've got the little hooky-doo right on the outside. If you put it backwards, this could potentially hit up against your rotor and cause massive noise. Now Now with all the tins on there, it's going to be time to move along to lubing our slider pins. When we do this, we want to, of course, coat the entire shaft of the slider pin, and then you want to make your way up along this upper ridge right here, up and into that groove. That's going to be super important. Now the next thing we want to do is go ahead and install our boot, whether it's old or new. Go ahead and slide it up onto there, and then give it a nice spin. This is going to help make sure that the grease is making its way along that entire channel. That's going to help keep moisture out of there. I'm just going to add a little bit more of this grease now along the shaft, and then up along this area. I'm going to be very careful, and I want to make sure that I get it up along this ridge as well. And now at this point, I can install our slider. I'm going to give it a nice spin as I go in, and then of course give it a nice twist once it's all the way in. Work the grease in there the way that it needs to be, and then do the same to the other side. This is cleaned and prepped. Let's set it aside and grab onto our new rotor. Go ahead and clean down your rotor. Now let's coat this hub surface with some copper never sees. Go ahead and put on our new rotor, and of course I'm just going to start on a lug nut so it can't wobble around on me. Let's make sure that all the threads on our bolts are nice and clean. Once you have the threads clean, go ahead and apply a little bit of red thread locker. Now let's get the bracket back on here. Start in both of your caliper bracket bolts, snug them up, and then we'll torque them to manufacturer specifications. If your ABS wire is in the way, just go ahead and slide that right out of there as well. Now let's torque this to 100 foot-pounds. It's going to be time to install our brake pads. What you're going to notice in your kit is that 2 of the pads are going to come with wear indicators on them. Those are going to be super important to make sure that you put on the inside aspect of your brakes, not on the outside. Of course, when you put them on, you're going to want that wear indicator on the inside, like I said, and we're going to have it in the downward position. Let's go ahead and slide that in. Do the same to the outer pad. Now it's going to be time to prep the caliper itself. We're going to take a little bit more of that caliper grease, and I'm going to go right along the piston. Essentially, we just want to go on the mating portion, so where the piston touches up against the pad, and of course where these 2 ears touch up against the pad as well. Now let's take that caliper, slide it right over the pads, and then we'll start in our caliper slider bolts here. Once we have these in, we'll go ahead and snug them up and then torque them to 26 foot-pounds. Now let's resecure our ABS wire. And also inspect your flex hose just to make sure it didn't get twisted when you dismounted and remounted your caliper. Let's just take a quick look at everything and just make sure everything's put together correctly. We definitely torqued everything, we don't have our flex hose twisted, and the ABS wire is reattached. This looks amazing. Let's get our wheel back on. Let's get this off of here. Now let's start on all of our lug nuts, and then we'll bottom this out. We'll put the wheel so it's just barely touching the ground, and then torque the lug nuts to 122 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, so now all you have to do is fully lower your Jeep down to the ground, go ahead and pump up the brakes so it's nice and firm, and take it for a road test.